President have just dropped their first full-length EP. It's called King of Terrors, and long story short, I am here to tell you it's fucking fantastic. I think, personally, this is the most interesting musical project in terms of style, in terms of kind of setting, in terms of imagery, and just the way that they've kind of like managed to take the music industry by storm, at least in the spheres that I move in, is one of the most interesting versions of that I have seen in quite a long time. So for some context, President are an anonymous band that got attention because they got put onto the lineup for Download Festival last year without having released any music at all. And of course, immediately the rumor mill started to spark. People were comparing them, saying they might be, you know, a sort of offshoot of Sleep Token. There was talk of people involved from Slipknot, I think possibly again because of the masks, and various other like conspiracy theories before a song had even been released. Over the course of the next couple of months, they released their first few tracks, which interestingly were chronologically also the first tracks in this EP. So they started with In the Name of the Father, and I believe Fearless was also released before their inaugural rally, which is when they played at Download. They played to a crazy, huge crowd. The Dog 2 stage was absolutely like over capacity. People were spilling out at the same time. So big, warm reception, and of course, every person on the front row had their little phones up, so as soon as that happened, when the first 5 tracks were available to hear in some capacity, you know, with dubious audio, etc., etc., but it gave us freaks who've been obsessing over this band since the beginning something to really latch on to. Of course, the band is still technically anonymous, but because people have got lots and lots of time in their hands, and also, to be fair, after a while, it sort of became fairly apparent, we kind of know who most of the musicians are in that band, including the President, the lead singer, the masked character, but I think, personally, I am not going to refer to them by who we know them to actually be, because I don't think it's fun. It's the same with a band like Sleep Token, that everyone just kind of plays along. It's part of the mystique. They are wanting to be identified this way. I think it's quite important for the project and the way that it's personal to the lead singer. So I'm only going to refer to the lead singer and the sort of mastermind behind this band as the President for the duration of this review. Vocals. So what's interesting about the vocals and the lyrics specifically is that there's a lot of religious undertones here. Like lyrically, I mean, the thing is called the King of Terrors, right? Which I think is a biblical way of referring to death. And I have listened to a couple of interviews with the President in, you know, I think Loudwire or so on and so forth. And he was talking a lot about how this sort of like set of music, this EP, this band, this project has kind of been spawned from a sort of fear, like a mortal dread he's sort of developed as he's kind of gone into the sort of like middle-aged period of his life. And that really, really reflects itself in the music itself. If you listen to the lyrics across the entire thing, there are lots of references to death and love transcending death, what happens afterwards, that kind of thing, and the way that people kind of cope with this sort of like, you know, the ever-knowing thing, the curse of the human condition that we all know that it's eventually coming for us, which is, I know it's kind of bleak stuff, but it is interesting to hear him get so introspective with this stuff, especially when a lot of his previous projects are way more, well, I'm going to say impersonal. This feels very personal, which is kind of interesting that it's layered with so much other subtext, all these religious, you know, iconography. And I mean, just look at my t-shirt. This is a President t-shirt, and that, you know, from a distance, you could almost imagine was like, you know, some sort of religious-y thing. I also happen to really like the religious imagery. I find it appealing in sort of most contexts, so I like that kind of stuff. A lot of the language that comes out of that I also think is really poetic, so I think it's really nice the way that that's integrated. There are some screams in there that will make your hairs stand on end. It's insane. Honestly, this as a vocal demonstration for the President is very impressive. He goes from such a wide range of quite kind of reduced, subtle, and very hip-hop inspired vocals. It's quite rappy and quite large, you know, amounts of the CP, to be honest, and they're quite soft and tender in the way that they're delivered, and then he goes into this full throttled growl that isn't quite a scream, but it just really feels impassioned, and we get that quite a lot of times in, say, for example, the way that the chorus is transitioned into In the Name of the Father, or in Conclave, the second verse there, and a few other examples across the whole thing where he's able to, like, bring out this growl in a way that just, oh, it sits so well with me. But then, not only does it go into those growls, but this stuff also crosses into being quite fucking heavy, to be honest. And the screams that he's able to give out in this EP are fantastic. I honestly defy you to try and find a scream better on record than the one at the end of Rage. That scream feels like some anguished, tortured soul finally unleashing everything, and that is really, really impressive. I love it. Every single time that scream comes on, I cannot help but go, "Wah!" at the same time. One of the things I have noticed people have found to be a bit, well, controversial maybe, some people love it, some people don't, is the amount of effects being used on the vocals. And this is something that when I first listened to President, when In the Name of the Father first came out, I too was a little put off by. I think a lot of people describe it as auto-tune, and I am not convinced it is auto-tune. Actually, it doesn't kind of sharpen off the edges of the note transitions in the way that auto-tune often does, and also I don't think the President needs auto-tune to make sure he's in tune. What it definitely does though is there's an EQ on there that tightens it up. It gives it a more kind of digital feel to it. It definitely knocks a lot of the bass out of there, and also it octaves it. He's singing at a slightly lower octave than people think he is, because the effects are mirroring it up the octave, and actually the way that it's mixed makes it feel like that higher note is often the main melody. That, for a greater or lesser extent, is present throughout pretty much this entire album. I started off unsure and have moved into the category of people who think that actually I really like it. I think it's one of the defining qualities of the President's sound. It's one of the things that makes them unique. It puts them in a category, sadly, like Sleep Token, where there's this kind of like genre-bending feel to it. It merges lots of stuff, but it really feels natural, like it's all coming from the same brain, and I think that the vocal effects are definitely part of that. I personally think it is a worthwhile trade-off. I like that part of it, but I think that's probably something you're going to have to figure out yourself as to whether or not you like that detail with them. Production. The production on this album is immaculate, if you ask me. Everything is tight and clean. The effects are so well executed. They never overstay their welcome. The delay, the reverb, whatever it is, it's always so perfectly tight in the way that it's done. It's like an art form unto itself, the way that's done there. The tones of the guitars are chunky and fat, and when they want to kick in, oh brother, do they kick in. One of the only criticisms I have is that the drums blend from being a full-size metal kit to, I think, probably just a drum machine for some of the more hip-hop inspired stuff, which is fine. I don't mind that, but I personally prefer the tones of the live drum kit, and I think maybe I would have been curious to hear what some of those lines would have sounded like if they didn't use those more digital sounding tones. Maybe I'm wrong, who knows, maybe if I'd heard that version of it I wouldn't like it any more or any less. In terms of the instrumentation, it's all immaculate. The guitars, they never go too crazy, there's no big fat solos anywhere, it doesn't kind of like fall into that kind of classic rock or prog rock stuff too much, but what it does do is really bring this thick, raw energy to it, which I think works very nicely in contrast with the vocals, especially with the vocals being so changeable and sweet in places and very high-pitched a lot of the time. So having this really heavy root with those guitars is lovely. Very much appreciate that. There are a couple of songs across the EP that experiment with a few other instruments. I think at the end of Destroy Me, you hear an acoustic guitar for the only time, and that is really nice. It's just such a palate cleanser, especially because Destroy Me is one of the heaviest songs that comes from a very thick wall of sound type of feel to it. So have this outro be acoustic guitar is really nice. It gives it this kind of like breath of fresh air feeling where you should sort of be holding your lighter in the air after the mosh pits happen, kind of like belting out that final chorus before you all pass out. So I really love that. And again, Conclave has also got piano in it, which I really like. It's just a sonic change up, right? I really like that. Quite interestingly, as far as I'm aware, based on interviews I've seen, I think all of the instrumentation in there is performed in the studio by the President, which is something I wasn't sure that this person was capable of, to us. I didn't realize how eclectic their knowledge is. I mean, I guess they've been in the industry for a long time, but still, it's very impressive to hear that. And again, I think it really helps. It's similar to something like Ghost, where it really helps to execute one man's vision when everything is just coming from the same brain. So that side of it is really well done. Vocals are excellently recorded. Production across the entire board is very tight. No complaints there. Album flow and structure. So this is an interesting one because it's only 6 tracks, of which we already had 4. But to me, this EP feels very much like it's got 2 very distinctive styles of song in there that are more or less swapped track by track. So you've got songs like Fearless, Dionysus, and Destroy Me, and those songs are, I think, probably more traditionally metal. They've got a bit more kind of like noughties emo going on there. They're less experimental, and I think they probably really root it. They have these anthemic choruses. I defy you to listen to the Fearless chorus more than once and not sing along afterwards. It's very like big scream, stadium worthy stuff. I really love that kind of thing. And then you've got the other side of this EP, In the Name of the Father, Rage, and Conclave, which again are spread out. It's not like one and then the other, they're split across, but these ones are the more interesting ones stylistically. I think these are the ones that have the greater hip-hop influences. You have, I will admit, somewhat of, especially when it comes to In the Name of the Father and Conclave, where they've got this kind of like quite reduced drum machine heavy, very hip-hop inspired verses, lots of vocal effects going on in that part of it, and then they move into these big, fat, heavy choruses, lots of screaming involved there. There's usually some sort of breakdown that comes towards the end, and then maybe a more melodic outro, which I would admit, I think that possibly he went to the well on that song structure one too many times, but then you get songs like Rage, which basically have a kind of like slow build up with, again, a very hip-hop influenced verse, but then you get to the second version of it and the things are getting a little bit more intense. You get the chorus twice, and that chorus feels like such a big, fat payoff. It's so worth it. You get that mad scream, big heavy drums at the end. So I really like the way that there's that more experimental, that weirder stuff, that thing that really makes them that unique special sauce of President, mixed in with the other things, which definitely are still pure President. It all is, obviously. I like the contrast. I like that it kind of grounds itself and then goes off again and grounds itself. And I think that they also are indicative to the lyrical content in those songs, where Fearless, Dionysus, and Destroy Me are, I think, again, they're more angsty in their lyrics. They're talking more about kind of like personal flaws and sort of like experiencing angst at these things, right? And it's a sort of like aggressive-ish way of dealing with this existential crisis and all of that, whilst In the Name of the Father, Rage, and Conclave, I think, are far more introspective, which is interesting because the song Rage is called Rage, but again, these ones are far more about, I don't know, kind of like they're softer in their approach to stuff. They use more, I don't know, they use more imagery, I guess is where I'm going with this. They are more intellectual, maybe, in their approach at dealing with these kind of like psychological problems, dealing with the human experience. I love the way that this album balances out. It really feels like a collective piece of art, and that is something that is kind of dying nowadays. I do think this album should be experienced really in its full like arc. I think you should sit down for 20 minutes and just buster it all. You will come out a better person for it. You'll feel like you've been in the brain of the president, and that, I think, is something that is lacking nowadays. I think a lot of people write for singles, so it's nice to see this being a more collective piece of artwork. And it's kind of interesting also, because as far as I'm aware, In the Name of the Father was recorded, well, maybe not recorded, but was written before the concept of President as a project, full stop, was really conceived. So it's really interesting to see how that song maybe is the one that shaped how the rest of this imagery, the rest of this album, the way of expressing these feelings is out. Final thoughts are, you should do yourself a favor and go and listen to this album. I think it is very commendable in this day and age to come out and just be weird, acknowledge that, just completely start from scratch. I know that people will argue that they maybe have an unfair advantage because of the kind of like previous history of the president. I think, screw that, you're allowed to do what you like. If you're able to pull a couple of strings to get yourself on a download lineup one time to help your band pick up, good for you, because as far as I'm aware, everything else has been pretty much done in-house. He recorded and, you know, produced everything himself. I think the music videos, well, it's very well shot, and I would really encourage you to go and have a look at them. The imagery in those is really strange in places, especially the evolution of the mask. But as far as I'm aware, those are comparatively DIY. I mean, the president said it was basically him and a few friends, but I'd imagine that, you know, that kind of means more than if I was to say that, but that's besides the point. This album is amazing. It is an emotional, cathartic release that goes from everywhere, from these very sweet moments of kind of like internal dread with these like screaming, angsty, vicious, chunky riffs. It's just a wonderful experience to go through the entire thing. I am so excited to see them, because every single show I've attempted to get tickets for has been sold out pretty much instantly, which is a good thing for the band and a bad thing for me. But as far as I'm aware, the president has said this EP will remain an EP. There's no more tracks coming onto the King of Terrors. This is it. But he is already working on a full-length feature album that is going to come up, I'm hoping, sooner rather than later. Hopefully based on the success of this, I would imagine so. And interestingly, he did also give a little tidbit and say that they are planning on expanding on the lore of the president character itself, which is kind of interesting, because the president is also being used as this facsimile for the singer, right? As a way to kind of like unleash these internal feelings and be disconnected from them in a way that allows you to be more personal. So it's kind of interesting to also make a fictionalized lore around this person. But either way, I'm here for it. I'm very excited. Let me know in the comments, what do you guys think too? If you couldn't tell, I'm a little bit of a suck-up, I'm a little bit of a fanboy, but, you know, hey, it's nice to be excited about stuff. It's really just a breath of fresh air to have this kind of like mystery thing with all this cool imagery and this kind of putting everything together, trying to figure out who it is. And I've gone through the arc of finding out who the singer was and going back and listening to a lot of their back catalogue, which I've enjoyed. I like that. I think it is fun to get obsessed and into this kind of stuff. So let me know in the comments, what do you guys think? How does this stack up to other projects? What do you think of this entire album? What is your favorite track? As of now, I don't think anything's topped In the Name of the Father for me, but that could well change because I foresee a lot of plays of this EP on my horizon. Thank you very much for watching. Like, share, subscribe, all of that crazy stuff, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.